The morning sun cast long shadows across the military training ground as Elena Kozlov stepped out of the transport truck. Her boots hit the dusty earth with a soft thud, and, immediately she felt the weight of dozens of eyes upon her. The other recruits, all men, had already formed their groups and were whispering among themselves. She could hear fragments of their conversations carried on the wind. "Look at that," one of them snorted. "They're sending women now." "What's next, children?" another voice added, followed by harsh laughter. Elena kept her face expressionless as she shouldered her gear bag and walked toward the registration table. At 24, she had already faced more challenges than most of these boys could imagine. Growing up in a small village outside Moscow, she had learned to hunt with her grandfather's old rifle before she could properly read. Her father had died when she was 12, leaving her mother to raise 3 children alone. Elena had become the provider, tracking game through the forests to put food on their table. But, none of these men knew her story. All they saw was a woman in their domain. Captain Viktor Petrov stood behind the registration table, his weathered face showing no emotion as Elena approached. He had seen many recruits come and go, but this was the first time he had a female sniper candidate in his program. The orders from headquarters had been clear, though he personally had his doubts. "Name," he said curtly, not looking up from his clipboard. "Elena Kozlov, sir," she replied, her voice steady and clear. "You realize what you're signing up for, Miss Kozlov?" Petrov finally raised his eyes to meet hers. "This isn't a regular infantry program. Sniper training is the most demanding course we offer. The failure rate is 80%, even for our strongest candidates." Elena nodded. "I understand, sir. Do you?" Petrov leaned forward slightly. "We're talking about weeks in the wilderness with minimal supplies. Physical challenges that will push you beyond your limits. Mental pressure that breaks even hardened soldiers. And, if you somehow make it through training, you'll be expected to take human lives from distances where you can see their faces through your scope." The recruits nearby had grown quiet, listening to this exchange. Elena could feel their anticipation, waiting for her to back down, to admit this was all a mistake. "I'm here because I can do the job, sir," she said simply. Petrov studied her for a long moment, then signed her papers. "Bunk assignments are posted on the board. Training begins at 0500 hours tomorrow. I suggest you get some rest. You'll need it." As Elena walked toward the barracks, the whispers started again behind her. "She won't last a week. I give her 3 days, maximum. This is what happens when politicians make military decisions." She found her assigned bunk in a corner of the men's barracks. The accommodation arrangements clearly hadn't been designed with female recruits in mind. A thin partition had been hastily erected to give her a small private area, but it was symbolic at best. Privacy would be minimal. The other recruits filtered into the barracks throughout the afternoon. Elena unpacked her belongings methodically, arranging her gear with the precision her grandfather had taught her. Everything had its place, and everything in its place. This philosophy had kept her alive during countless hunting trips in harsh conditions. "Well, well," a voice said behind her. She turned to see a tall, broad-shouldered man with close-cropped blonde hair and pale blue eyes. His name tape read Volkov. "So you're the woman who thinks she can be a sniper." Elena continued organizing her gear without responding. "I'm talking to you," Volkov said, stepping closer. Several other recruits had gathered around, sensing entertainment. "I heard you," Elena replied calmly, not looking up from her work. Volkov laughed, a sound without humor. "You know what I think? I think you're here to make some kind of political statement. Prove that women can do anything men can do. But, this isn't about politics, sweetheart. This is about life and death." Elena finally turned to face him. Volkov was at least 6 inches taller and probably 50 pounds heavier. "What's your point?" "My point is that when bullets start flying, and people's lives depend on your shot, nobody cares about your feelings or your cause. They care about results. And, I've never seen a woman who could deliver under that kind of pressure. Have you ever seen combat? Elena asked. The question caught Volkov off guard. That's not the point. Actually, it is exactly the point, Elena said, her voice remaining level. You're making assumptions about my capabilities based on my gender, but you have no actual experience to draw from. That suggests poor judgment, which seems like a bigger problem than my supposed limitations. The other recruits murmured among themselves. Volkov's face reddened. We'll see how tough you are when you're crawling through mud for 16 hours straight, he growled. I suppose we will, Elena agreed, turning back to her gear. That evening, the recruits gathered in the mess hall for their first briefing. Captain Petrov stood at the front of the room, flanked by two other instructors. The walls were covered with charts, maps, and photographs of various weapons systems. Gentlemen, Petrov began, then paused as his eyes found Elena. And, lady. You are here because someone, somewhere, believes you might have what it takes to become a sniper. I am here to prove them wrong. A few nervous chuckles rippled through the room. Let me be clear about what we do here, Petrov continued. We don't train soldiers. We create precision instruments of war. A sniper is not just someone who can shoot accurately. Any decent marksman can hit a target at long range given enough time and perfect conditions. A sniper must be able to shoot accurately while exhausted, hungry, cold, wet, and under extreme stress. You must be able to remain motionless for hours at a time, sometimes in conditions that would break ordinary people. You must be able to make split-second decisions that can mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. He gestured to one of the photographs on the wall, showing a camouflaged figure barely visible among rocks and vegetation. A sniper's greatest weapon is not their rifle. It's their mind. You must be able to think several steps ahead of your target, anticipate their movements, account for wind, temperature, humidity, and dozens of other variables that affect trajectory. You must be able to kill without hesitation and live with the consequences of every shot you take. Elena listened intently, absorbing every word. Around her, some of the other recruits were beginning to look less confident than they had that afternoon. Over the next 8 weeks, we will test every aspect of your physical and mental capabilities, Petrov said. You will learn field craft, camouflage, stalking techniques, ballistics, weather reading, and advanced marksmanship. More importantly, you will learn about yourselves. You will discover what you're truly capable of, and, for most of you, that discovery will be disappointing. He let that sink in for a moment before continuing. The washout rate for this program is 82%. That means only about 4 or 5 of you will graduate. Some of you will quit because the physical demands are too great. Others will fail because they can't handle the psychological pressure. A few will be dismissed because they lack the mental discipline required for this work. Petrov's eyes swept across the room, making contact with each recruit. I want to be absolutely clear about one thing, he said. I don't care what your background is, what your gender is, or why you think you belong here. The only thing that matters is results. If you can do the job, you'll graduate. If you can't, you'll be gone. It's that simple. Elena felt a mixture of relief and determination at these words. She didn't want special treatment or accommodation. She wanted the chance to prove herself on equal terms. Your first exercise begins at 0500 tomorrow morning, Petrov announced. You'll be divided into pairs for a navigation and survival challenge. You'll have minimal equipment and 72 hours to reach a designated checkpoint 40 kilometers away. No roads, no trails, just wilderness. Teams that arrive late will be automatically dismissed from the program. As the briefing ended and recruits began filing out of the mess hall, Elena noticed that several of the men were eyeing her with barely concealed skepticism. She overheard fragments of conversations as she passed. 40 kilometers through rough country in 3 days. She'll never make it. I just hope I don't get stuck with her as a partner. This whole thing is a joke. Elena returned to her bunk area and began preparing her gear for the next day's challenge. She laid out her compass, map case, water purification tablets, and emergency rations. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory, teaching her how to read the landscape, how to find water, how to move quietly through dense forest. The forest doesn't care if you're strong or weak, he had told her years ago. It only cares if you're smart and respectful. Those who understand this survive. Those who don't become food for wolves. As she worked, Elena became aware of a conversation taking place on the other side of the partition. Volkov was talking to several other recruits, his voice deliberately loud enough for her to hear. I'm telling you, this is going to be a disaster, he was saying. One of us is going to get stuck babysitting her, and it's going to cost us our spot in the program. Maybe she'll quit before then, another voice suggested hopefully. Not likely, a third voice chimed in. Women like her, they're too stubborn to know when they're beaten. She'll drag her partner down with her before she admits she doesn't belong here. Elena continued her preparations, showing no outward reaction to their comments. But, inwardly, she felt a familiar burning sensation in her chest. It was the same feeling she had experienced as a child when classmates mocked her second-hand clothes, or when officials dismissed her family's struggles after her father's death. It wasn't anger, exactly. It was something colder and more focused. It was determination. She thought about her mother, working 3 jobs to support the family. She thought about her younger sister, dreaming of becoming a doctor but unable to afford medical school. She thought about her brother, killed in a training accident while serving his mandatory military service. All of them had faced people who said they couldn't succeed, that they should lower their expectations, that their circumstances made success impossible. Elena had learned long ago that the best response to such people wasn't argument or protest. It was results. The next morning arrived with a gray dawn and temperatures barely above freezing. Elena was awake and dressed before the wake-up call, having learned from childhood that being prepared was always better than being fast. She checked her gear one final time and made her way to the assembly area. Captain Petrov stood waiting with a list of partner assignments. As recruits gathered around him, Elena noticed that most of them avoided looking in her direction. When Petrov began reading the pairs aloud, she listened carefully for her name. Kozlov and Mikhailov, Petrov announced. Elena looked around for her partner and spotted a lean, dark-haired man standing slightly apart from the main group. Alexei Mikhailov appeared to be in his late 20s, with the quiet intensity of someone who preferred observation to conversation. When their eyes met, he nodded politely but without enthusiasm. As teams began receiving their maps and coordinate sheets, Elena approached her new partner. "Have you done much wilderness navigation?" she asked. Mikhailov shrugged. "Some. You?" "Yes." He studied her for a moment, as if trying to assess whether she was overestimating her abilities. "This isn't a hiking trail," he said finally. "The terrain is rough, and the weather forecast isn't good." "I understand that. Do you?" His tone wasn't hostile, but it carried doubt. "Because if you slow us down or can't keep up, we both wash out. I've been working toward this opportunity for 2 years. I'm not willing to give it up because someone else wasn't realistic about their limitations." Elena met his gaze steadily. "I won't slow you down." Mikhailov nodded slowly. "We'll see." Captain Petrov called for attention and began explaining the rules of the exercise. Each team would be given a different route to the same checkpoint, ensuring that they couldn't simply follow another team. They would carry only basic survival gear and emergency rations. No outside assistance was permitted, and teams that requested rescue would be automatically eliminated from the program. The weather forecast calls for rain beginning this evening and, continuing through tomorrow, Petrov announced. Temperatures will drop to near freezing tonight. Several teams have historically failed this exercise not because they got lost, but because they couldn't handle the physical and mental stress of being cold, wet, and miserable for 3 days straight. He handed each team their sealed envelope containing their specific route and coordinates. You have exactly 72 hours from the moment you open these envelopes, he said. Teams that arrive late will find the checkpoint unmanned and their military careers over. Any questions? Elena raised her hand. What if someone gets seriously injured? Each team carries an emergency beacon, Petrov replied. Activating it will bring immediate rescue but will also result in automatic dismissal from the program. The choice is yours to make. As teams began opening their envelopes and studying their assigned routes, Elena and Mikhailov found a quiet spot to examine their map. Their checkpoint was located in a mountainous area covered with dense forest and crossed by several rivers. The direct route would take them through some challenging terrain, but it was clearly the fastest path. What do you think? Mikhailov asked, tracing possible routes with his finger. Elena studied the topographical features carefully. The direct route looks obvious, but those river crossings could be dangerous if the water level is high from the rain. There's an alternative path that adds maybe 8 kilometers but stays on higher ground. Mikhailov considered this. 8 extra kilometers is a lot when you're carrying full packs. It is, Elena agreed. But, getting swept away by a flooded river is worse. You really think the rivers will be that dangerous? Elena pointed to the contour lines on the map. Look at these drainage patterns. All the rainfall from a wide area funnels into these river valleys. If we get the heavy rain they're forecasting, these crossings could become impossible. Mikhailov studied the map more carefully. He had to admit her analysis made sense. All right. We take the longer route but stay dry. Better safe than sorry. As they shouldered their packs and prepared to begin the exercise, Elena noticed Volkov and his partner heading directly toward the river crossings she had been concerned about. Volkov caught her looking and smirked. Taking the easy way already, he called out. I should have known. Elena didn't respond, but Mikhailov stepped forward. The easy way is washing out because you were too proud to think strategically. Volkov's expression darkened, but before he could reply, Captain Petrov blew his whistle, officially beginning the exercise. Elena and Mikhailov set off through the forest at a steady pace. The morning air was crisp and still, but Elena could smell moisture in the air that suggested the weather forecast would prove accurate. As they walked, she found herself falling into the rhythm of long-distance movement that her grandfather had taught her years ago. Steady but not rushed, alert but not tense, conserving energy for when it would be needed most. You move well in the woods, Mikhailov observed after they had been walking for an hour. I grew up in the forest, Elena replied simply. Hunting? Among other things. Mikhailov seemed to accept this answer without requiring elaboration, which Elena appreciated. She had learned that many people either romanticized or dismissed her rural upbringing, and she preferred to let her actions speak for themselves. As the morning progressed, they made good time through relatively easy terrain. The forest was thick enough to provide natural camouflage but not so dense as to make movement difficult. Elena found herself appreciating Mikhailov's approach to the exercise. He was clearly experienced in wilderness travel, moving efficiently and quietly without unnecessary conversation. Around midday, they stopped to rest and eat at a small clearing. Elena checked their position on the map and calculated their progress. We're actually ahead of schedule, she reported. If we maintain this pace, we should reach the checkpoint with several hours to spare. Assuming the weather doesn't slow us down, Mikhailov added, looking up at the increasingly cloudy sky. As they resumed walking, Elena noticed that her partner seemed less skeptical of her abilities than he had been that morning. She had demonstrated that she could navigate accurately, move quietly through the forest, and maintain their planned pace without difficulty. More importantly, she hadn't complained about the weight of her pack or the difficulty of the terrain. By late afternoon, the first raindrops began falling through the forest canopy. Within an hour, it had developed into a steady downpour that soaked through even their rain gear. The temperature dropped noticeably, and the forest floor became slippery and treacherous. "This is going to be a long night," Mikhailov observed as they sought shelter under a large pine tree to check their position. Elena studied the map in the fading daylight. "There's a rock overhang about 2 kilometers ahead. If we can reach it before dark, we'll have decent shelter for the night. Can you find it in the dark if we don't make it in time?" Elena looked around at the surrounding forest, noting landmarks and the general terrain features. Yes. They pushed on through the increasing rain and gathering darkness. Elena took the lead, using techniques her grandfather had taught her for moving safely through unfamiliar terrain at night. She tested each step carefully, using her hands as much as her eyes to navigate around obstacles and maintain their bearing. When they finally reached the rock overhang Elena had identified on the map, both were thoroughly soaked and beginning to feel the effects of the cold rain. But their shelter was everything Elena had hoped for, a deep recess in a rock face that would keep them completely dry, with enough room to spread out their sleeping gear. As they settled in for the night, Mikhailov looked at Elena with what might have been the beginning of respect. "Good call on this route," he said. "Those teams that tried to cross the rivers today are probably having a miserable time right now." Elena was too tired to respond with more than a nod, but internally she felt a small sense of satisfaction. They had completed the first day of the exercise successfully, staying on schedule despite the challenging weather. More importantly, she had begun to prove to at least one person that she belonged in this program. But she knew the real tests were still ahead. The second day dawned gray and cold, with rain still falling steadily through the forest canopy. Elena woke before her watch alarm, a habit developed during countless hunting trips when missing the optimal hour could mean returning home empty-handed. She checked their gear quietly, noting that despite the rock overhang's protection, everything felt damp and cold. Mikhailov stirred as she began repacking her equipment. In the dim morning light, she could see that his earlier skepticism had given way to something approaching professional respect. He had watched her navigate through difficult terrain in darkness and poor weather without complaint or error. "Morning," he said quietly, beginning his own preparations. "Still raining. Should clear by afternoon," Elena replied, studying the sky through the forest canopy. "Winds shifting from the north." Mikhailov looked up, trying to read the same signs she apparently saw in the gray clouds. "How can you tell?" "The way the leaves are moving. The sound of the rain on different surfaces. My grandfather taught me to read weather patterns when I was young. Hunters can't afford to be caught unprepared by sudden changes." As they prepared to resume their journey, Elena checked their position on the map one final time. They were still on schedule, perhaps even slightly ahead. The challenging terrain of the second day would take them through a series of ridges and valleys before reaching the final approach to their checkpoint. "How are you feeling?" Mikhailov asked as they shouldered their packs. Elena understood that he wasn't asking about her physical condition as much as her mental state. The combination of cold, wet conditions and the stress of the exercise had broken many previous candidates by this point. "Fine," she replied simply. "This weather is uncomfortable, but it's not dangerous. We stay dry when we can, stay warm when we must, and keep moving toward our objective." As they set off through the dripping forest, Elena found herself thinking about the other teams scattered throughout the wilderness around them. How many were still moving toward their checkpoints? How many had already given up and activated their emergency beacons? How many had made poor decisions that would cost them precious time or put them in real danger? The morning's travel took them up a series of steep ridges covered with loose rock and slippery vegetation. The rain made every step treacherous, and, more than once Elena had to use her hands to maintain balance on particularly difficult sections. Behind her, she could hear Mikhailov's steady breathing and the careful placement of his boots on the uncertain ground. "You're setting a good pace," he said during one of their brief rest stops. "Not too fast, but we're making steady progress." Elena nodded, checking their position against the map. "The difficult part is still ahead. That valley system we have to cross this afternoon will be the real test." Around midday, they reached a high ridge that offered their first clear view of the terrain ahead. Through breaks in the clouds, Elena could see the complex network of valleys and streams they would need to navigate to reach their checkpoint. Even from this distance, she could see that her prediction about the river levels had been accurate. Brown water was rushing through channels that normally would have been easily fordable. "Jesus," Mikhailov breathed, studying the landscape below them. "Look at those rivers. They're way higher than normal." "Which is why we're taking the high route," Elena reminded him. "Those teams that chose the direct path are either stuck waiting for the water to recede, or they're taking dangerous risks to continue." As they began their descent into the valley system, Elena's grandfather's training proved invaluable once again. She had learned to read the subtle signs that indicated safe paths down steep terrain, which rocks were solid and, which were loose, how to identify stable footing in muddy conditions, where to find natural handholds when needed. Mikhailov, she noticed, was an experienced outdoorsman in his own right, but his techniques were more suited to normal hiking conditions. In these challenging circumstances, he began following her lead more often, recognizing that her skills were better adapted to their current situation. "Where did you learn to move like this?" he asked during one particularly technical section of their descent. "Necessity," Elena replied. "When you're tracking wounded game through difficult terrain, you can't afford to make noise or lose your footing. Every mistake could mean losing your family's food for a week." By late afternoon, they had successfully navigated through the valley system and were climbing toward the final ridge that separated them from their checkpoint. The rain had finally stopped, as Elena had predicted, but both were thoroughly soaked and beginning to feel the accumulated fatigue of 2 days of continuous movement. "How much further?" Mikhailov asked, consulting his own map. Elena checked their position carefully. "Maybe 6 kilometers. We should reach the checkpoint well before the deadline." As they crested the final ridge, Elena caught sight of something that made her freeze. In the distance, she could see 2 figures moving slowly across an open slope. Even at this distance, she could tell that one of them was struggling badly. "Do you see that?" she asked Mikhailov, pointing toward the distant figures. Mikhailov squinted in the direction she indicated. "Yeah. Looks like one of the other teams. And it looks like they're in trouble." As they watched, one of the distant figures collapsed and remained down for several minutes before his partner managed to help him back to his feet. The team was clearly in distress, probably dealing with hypothermia or exhaustion or both. "We should help them," Elena said immediately. Mikhailov looked at her in surprise. "Help them?" "Elena, they're our competition. If they can't complete the exercise on their own, that's their problem." Elena was already adjusting her pack straps and checking her route toward the struggling team. "They're human beings in potential danger. That matters more than any exercise. But, if we help them, we could miss our own deadline. We could both wash out of the program." Elena looked at him steadily. "Then, we move fast enough to help them and still make our checkpoint on time." Mikhailov stared at her for a long moment, then shook his head with what might have been admiration or disbelief. "You're serious, aren't you? You'd risk your own chances to help competitors who probably wouldn't do the same for you." "Yes," Elena said simply. "Wouldn't you?" After another moment of hesitation, Mikhailov adjusted his own pack. "All right. But, we move fast, and we don't stay any longer than absolutely necessary." They altered course toward the struggling team, moving as quickly as safety allowed across the rough terrain. As they got closer, Elena could see that one of the men was showing clear signs of hypothermia, uncontrolled shivering, unsteady movement, and what appeared to be confusion about basic navigation. The struggling team turned out to be Volkov and his partner, a quiet recruit named Petrov. Volkov's earlier arrogance had been replaced by obvious distress. His lips had a bluish tinge, and his hands were shaking uncontrollably as he tried to consult his map. "What happened?" Elena asked as they approached. Petrov looked up with relief evident on his face. "We tried to ford one of those rivers yesterday. Victor fell in and got completely soaked. We've been trying to warm him up ever since, but he's getting worse instead of better." Elena quickly assessed Volkov's condition. His core temperature was clearly dangerously low, and he was beginning to show signs of altered mental status that indicated severe hypothermia. "We need to get him warm and dry immediately," she told Mikhailov. "Do you have dry clothes in your pack?" "Some," Mikhailov replied, already digging through his equipment. "Petrov, help me get him out of those wet clothes," Elena instructed. "We need to strip him down and get him into dry layers." Volkov tried to protest weakly, but Elena ignored his mumbled objections. She had seen hypothermia before, during long winter hunting trips, and she knew that modesty was a luxury they couldn't afford. Working quickly and efficiently, they stripped Volkov of his soaked clothing and redressed him in the driest layers they could assemble from their combined gear. Elena showed Petrov how to share body heat effectively while Mikhailov prepared hot tea from their emergency rations. "This is going to cost us at least an hour," Mikhailov said quietly to Elena as they worked. "Maybe more if he doesn't respond quickly." Elena checked her watch and calculated the distance remaining to their checkpoint. "We can still make it if we move fast afterward. And if we can't?" Elena met his eyes. "Then, we don't. But I can live with failing in exercise. I couldn't live with letting someone die when I could have prevented it." After 30 minutes of aggressive warming techniques, Volkov's condition began to improve noticeably. His shivering became more controlled, and his mental clarity started to return. He looked up at Elena with an expression she couldn't quite interpret. "Why?" he asked weakly. "Why are you helping me? I've been nothing but hostile to you since you arrived." Elena continued monitoring his condition as she answered. "Because that's what decent people do. They help each other when help is needed, regardless of personal feelings." Volkov was quiet for several minutes, absorbing this response. Finally, he managed a weak smile. "I owe you an apology. And probably my life." "You don't owe me anything," Elena replied. "Just promise me you'll be more careful with river crossings in the future." Once Volkov was stable enough to continue, Elena and Mikhailov prepared to resume their own journey. They had lost nearly 90 minutes helping the other team, which meant they would need to move much faster to reach their checkpoint on time. "Can you keep up?" Mikhailov asked as they prepared to leave. Elena shouldered her pack and checked her watch one final time. "I'll keep up. Let's go." What followed was the most physically demanding portion of the entire exercise. Elena pushed the pace harder than she had at any point during the previous 2 days, navigating through difficult terrain with a speed that bordered on reckless. But her grandfather's training served her well once again. She had learned to move quickly through the forest when necessary, whether pursuing wounded game or racing ahead of approaching storms. Mikhailov matched her pace gamely, though she could hear his breathing becoming labored as they climbed toward their final objective. The checkpoint was located on a prominent hilltop that offered views in all directions, making it easy to identify from a distance. As they approached the final climb to their checkpoint, Elena checked her watch and calculated their remaining time. They had less than 30 minutes to cover the last 2 kilometers, including a steep ascent that would normally take 45 minutes at a comfortable pace. "This is going to be close," she told Mikhailov as they began the final climb. "Too close," he replied, but his tone held determination rather than defeat. "But we've come too far to quit now. They attacked the hill with everything they had left. Elena's legs burned with accumulated fatigue, and her pack seemed to grow heavier with each step. But she maintained her pace through sheer force of will, driven by the knowledge that failing now would waste everything they had accomplished over the previous 3 days. With less than 5 minutes remaining before their deadline, they crested the final ridge and saw their checkpoint, a small tent with a table where an instructor sat with a clipboard and radio. They stumbled into the checkpoint area with 2 minutes to spare, both breathing heavily but grinning with exhaustion and relief. The instructor, a sergeant Elena didn't recognize, looked up from his paperwork as they approached. Team 7, Kozlov and Mikhailov, Elena reported, trying to catch her breath. The sergeant checked their names against his list and noted their arrival time. "Congratulations. You made it with time to spare." He paused, studying them with interest. "Though you look like you had to run the last few kilometers." "Something like that," Mikhailov replied. As they moved away from the checkpoint to rest and wait for transport back to base, Mikhailov looked at Elena with undisguised respect. "I owe you an apology too," he said. "When I first saw you, I made a lot of assumptions about what you could and couldn't do. I was wrong about all of them." Elena was too tired to respond with more than a nod, but internally she felt a deep sense of satisfaction. She had not only completed one of the most challenging exercises in the sniper program, but she had done so while maintaining her principles and helping others when they needed it. More importantly, she had begun to change minds about what she was capable of. But, as they waited for the helicopter that would take them back to base, Elena knew that this was only the beginning. The real challenges of sniper training still lay ahead, and not everyone would be as willing as Mikhailov to revise their initial opinions. The helicopter arrived just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the mountainous terrain they had just traversed. As Elena climbed aboard with the other teams that had successfully completed the exercise, she noticed that several familiar faces were missing. Volkov and his partner had apparently activated their emergency beacon after all, despite her efforts to help them. The flight back to base gave Elena time to reflect on the events of the previous 3 days. She had proven to herself and others that she could handle the physical and mental demands of advanced military training. But, more than that, she had demonstrated that maintaining her personal values and helping others was compatible with military excellence. As the helicopter descended toward the base's landing pad, Elena could see Captain Petrov waiting with several other instructors. His expression was unreadable, but she noticed that he was holding a clipboard with what appeared to be evaluation forms. The next phase of training would focus on actual marksmanship and the technical aspects of sniper craft. Elena knew that her hunting background would help, but she also knew that military precision shooting was different from hunting in important ways. She would need to learn new techniques and adapt her existing skills to meet military standards. But, for now, she was simply grateful to have survived the first major test of the program. As the helicopter touched down and the instructors began calling for the successful teams to gather for debriefing, Elena felt a quiet confidence that she belonged here. The mockery and skepticism of her first day seemed like ancient history now. She had earned the right to be here through performance, not politics or special accommodation. That foundation would serve her well in the challenges that lay ahead. As she walked across the landing pad toward the debriefing area, Elena caught sight of some of the recruits who had washed out during the exercise. They were waiting to be processed for return to their original units, their expressions ranging from disappointment to relief. She felt sympathy for them, knowing that each had invested significant effort and hope in this opportunity. But, she also felt a renewed determination to make the most of her own chance. She had not come this far to settle for anything less than complete success. The weeks following the survival exercise brought a dramatic shift in the training program's focus. While the initial phase had tested physical endurance and mental toughness, the new curriculum concentrated on the technical skills that distinguished snipers from ordinary marksmen. Elena found herself spending long hours on shooting ranges, in classrooms studying ballistics, and, in field exercises that demanded unprecedented precision. Captain Petrov had restructured the remaining candidates into smaller groups for more intensive instruction. Of the original 32 recruits, only 14 had successfully completed the survival exercise. Elena noticed that the attitude toward her had evolved considerably since those first days of open mockery. The candidates who remained were serious professionals who had witnessed her performance under pressure. But, respect earned through one challenge didn't guarantee success in the next. Sniper training is not about becoming a better shooter, Senior Sergeant Dmitry Volkov announced to the assembled candidates on their first morning of marksmanship instruction. This was a different Volkov than the recruit who had challenged Elena initially. This man was a decorated veteran with over 20 years of sniper experience. Most of you can already shoot accurately under ideal conditions. What we're going to teach you is how to deliver precision fire when everything is going wrong. Elena stood at attention with the other candidates, her rifle held in the prescribed position. After the survival exercise, she had been issued the same equipment as everyone else, a precision rifle system, advanced optics, and specialized ammunition. The weapon felt different from her grandfather's hunting rifle, heavier and more complex, but fundamentally familiar. Your first lesson is going to challenge everything you think you know about shooting, Sergeant Volkov continued. We're going to start with what we call stress shooting. You'll engage targets after completing physical stress that will leave you exhausted and shaking. You'll shoot in weather conditions that make visibility nearly impossible. You'll engage multiple targets while under time pressure that simulates real combat conditions. He gestured toward the shooting range behind him, where targets were barely visible through artificially generated fog and smoke. Miss Kozlov, Sergeant Volkov called out, causing Elena to step forward. Since you're the newest addition to our program, you'll demonstrate the baseline exercise for the other candidates. Elena felt the weight of 14 pairs of eyes as she approached the firing line. This was clearly a test, though whether it was designed to showcase her abilities or expose her limitations remained unclear. You'll engage 5 targets at distances ranging from 300 to 800 meters, Sergeant Volkov explained. You have 2 minutes to identify, range, and engage all 5 targets. 1 shot per target. Miss any target, and you repeat the exercise until you achieve perfect accuracy. Elena nodded her understanding and began studying the range through her rifle scope. The artificial fog made target identification challenging, but not impossible. Her grandfather had taught her to hunt in all weather conditions, including early morning fog that could limit visibility to mere meters. Begin, Sergeant Volkov commanded. Elena dropped into a stable shooting position and began scanning the range systematically. Years of hunting experience had taught her to pick out subtle variations in color and shape that indicated the presence of targets. Within 30 seconds, she had identified all 5 target locations and begun calculating ranges and wind adjustments. Her first shot broke the silence with a sharp crack. Through her scope, she could see that the bullet had struck the center of the nearest target. She worked the bolt smoothly, chambering a fresh round, and shifted to the second target. The fog swirled and eddied around the range, sometimes obscuring targets entirely for several seconds before revealing them again. Elena timed her shots to coincide with moments of optimal visibility, a technique she had learned while hunting deer that appeared and disappeared among forest shadows. Her second, third, and fourth shots found their marks with mechanical precision. As she prepared to engage the final target, she became aware that the other candidates had grown completely silent. Even Sergeant Volkov seemed to be watching with more intensity than the exercise normally warranted. The 5th target was the most challenging, an 800-meter shot through swirling fog against a background that offered minimal contrast. Elena studied the wind indicators carefully, noting the slight movement of grass and vegetation at various points between her position and the target. Her grandfather had taught her to read these signs like a book. Her final shot seemed to hang in the air for an eternity before finding its mark. Through her scope, she could see the small puff of dust that indicated a solid hit in the target's center ring. "Cease fire," Sergeant Volkov commanded. "Clear and safe your weapon." Elena followed the prescribed safety procedures, ensuring her rifle was unloaded and safe before standing. The range remained eerily quiet as the results were confirmed by spotters with high-powered telescopes. 5 targets, 5 hits, all in the scoring ring, one of the spotters reported. Total time, 1 minute and 47 seconds. Sergeant Volkov nodded approvingly. "Outstanding shooting, Miss Kozlov. That's the standard the rest of you need to meet." As Elena returned to her position among the other candidates, she noticed a mixture of respect and concern in their expressions. Mikhailov caught her eye and nodded with obvious approval, but others seemed to be reassessing what they had assumed about the program's difficulty. The morning continued with each candidate attempting the same exercise Elena had completed. The results varied dramatically. Some struggled to identify targets in the challenging conditions, others had difficulty calculating ranges accurately, and several missed their shots entirely due to inadequate compensation for wind and fog effects. By afternoon, only half the candidates had successfully completed the basic exercise, and those who had often required multiple attempts to achieve perfect accuracy. "This is just the beginning," Sergeant Volkov announced as the day's training concluded. "Tomorrow we'll add movement to the equation. You'll engage targets while advancing, while retreating, and while moving laterally across varied terrain. By the end of the week, you'll be shooting from positions that would have seemed impossible when you arrived here." That evening, Elena found herself approached by several of her fellow candidates who wanted to understand her shooting techniques. Unlike the hostile questioning of her first days in the program, these conversations were genuinely professional exchanges between colleagues. "How do you read wind patterns so accurately?" asked Anderson, one of the few candidates who had completed the day's exercise successfully. "I've been shooting competitively for years, but I've never seen anyone make those calculations so quickly." Elena considered how to explain techniques that had become instinctive through years of practice. "It's not really calculation," she said finally. "It's more like reading the environment. Wind isn't just one consistent force. It changes direction and intensity at different distances and altitudes. You have to watch grass, leaves, dust, anything that shows you what the air is doing between you and your target. But how do you process all that information so quickly?" Anderson pressed. "Practice," Elena replied simply. "When hunting for food, you don't get second chances very often. Miss your shot, and your family doesn't eat that day. That kind of pressure teaches you to get it right the first time." Word of Elena's exceptional shooting performance spread quickly through the base. Within days, she found that instructors from other programs were observing her training sessions, and there were rumors that senior officers were taking notice of her progress. But Elena remained focused on the immediate challenges of each day's training. The program's intensity increased continuously, with new variables added to shooting exercises at a pace that eliminated additional candidates weekly. They learned to shoot while wearing full chemical protection gear that restricted vision and movement. They engaged targets while under simulated artillery bombardment that made concentration nearly impossible. They fired precision shots after completing obstacle courses designed to induce maximum physical stress and fatigue. Elena's hunting background continued to serve her well, but she also discovered that military precision shooting demanded new skills. Unlike hunting, where a quick, clean kill was the primary objective, military sniping required the ability to place shots in specific, often very small, areas of human targets. The psychological aspects of this training proved challenging for several candidates who hadn't fully considered the human cost of sniper operations. "You will be required to take human lives," Captain Petrov reminded them during one particularly intense classroom session. "Not just any lives, but specific individuals who have been identified as high-value targets. You will observe these people through your scope for extended periods, learning their routines, their mannerisms, their human characteristics. And then, you will kill them with a single shot. He let this reality settle before continuing. Some of you are discovering that you cannot handle this responsibility. There's no shame in recognizing your limitations. But, if you cannot accept the full reality of what snipers do, you need to remove yourself from this program immediately. 2 more candidates withdrew that evening, citing personal reasons for their departure. Elena understood their decision, though she found herself able to compartmentalize the moral complexities of sniper operations. Her grandfather had taught her that hunting was about more than killing, it was about understanding your prey completely and taking responsibility for the consequences of your actions. The remaining candidates now numbered only 8, and the training became even more specialized and demanding. They learned advanced camouflage techniques that could make a sniper virtually invisible at distances of less than 50 meters. They studied ballistics calculations that accounted for temperature, humidity, altitude, and even the rotation of the Earth on extremely long shots. Most challenging of all, they began training in what the instructors called unknown distance shooting, engaging targets without the benefit of laser rangefinders or other electronic aids. Elena excelled at this skill, drawing on years of experience estimating distances to game animals in various terrain and lighting conditions. "How do you do it?" asked Fedorov, one of the remaining candidates, after Elena had successfully engaged targets at ranges varying from 200 to 1,200 meters without missing a single shot. "The rest of us are using every trick we know to estimate range, and we're still missing by significant margins." Elena studied the targets they had just engaged, thinking about how to explain a skill that had become largely unconscious. "It's about building references," she said finally. "You have to train your eye to recognize what different distances look like under various conditions. A man-sized target at 400 meters looks different in bright sunlight than it does in heavy overcast. But, if you've seen enough examples, you start to recognize the patterns." "But, you're not just close," Fedorov insisted. "Your range estimates are accurate to within 10 or 15 meters almost every time. That level of precision should be impossible without instruments." Elena shrugged. "I've been estimating distances to animals for most of my life. When you're hunting, being wrong about range means missing your shot and losing your target. After thousands of repetitions, you get good at it." As the weeks progressed, Elena found herself increasingly isolated by her exceptional performance. While her fellow candidates treated her with professional respect, there was an underlying tension created by her consistent success at exercises that challenged everyone else. She was setting standards that others found difficult to match. The situation came to a head during an advanced stalking exercise that required candidates to approach within 200 meters of an observation post manned by experienced instructors with high-powered optics. The exercise simulated real sniper operations where detection meant mission failure or death. Candidates were given 8 hours to cover approximately 2 kilometers of varied terrain and reach a position where they could engage targets near the observation post. The terrain included open meadows, dense forest, and rocky areas that offered both opportunities and challenges for concealed movement. Elena began the exercise in the pre-dawn darkness, using techniques her grandfather had taught her for approaching deer that were extremely sensitive to human presence. She moved in short stages, advancing only when wind conditions and natural cover provided optimal concealment. Between movements, she remained motionless for extended periods, studying the terrain ahead and planning her next advance. By mid-morning, she had covered nearly half the required distance without being detected. The observation post was clearly visible through her binoculars, and she could see the instructors scanning the surrounding area with powerful spotting scopes. The most challenging section lay ahead, an open meadow approximately 300 meters wide that offered minimal natural concealment. Elena studied the area carefully, noting wind patterns in the grass and identifying the subtle terrain variations that might provide covered routes. She chose to cross the meadow during the hottest part of the day, when heat shimmer would distort the instructor's vision and make detection more difficult. Using a combination of low crawling and patience, she moved across the open ground in stages, timing her advances to coincide with wind gusts that bent the grass and created natural camouflage. The crossing took nearly 3 hours, but Elena reached the far side of the meadow without triggering any detection signals from the observation post. The final kilometer to her objective position took her through dense forest where her woodland skills proved decisive. She reached an ideal shooting position with more than 2 hours remaining in the exercise, giving her time to prepare a perfect firing solution. When time expired, she engaged the designated targets with 3 quick shots that would have been lethal in actual combat conditions. The instructor's debrief revealed that Elena had been the only candidate to complete the exercise without being detected. Several others had been spotted during their meadow crossings, and 2 had been identified almost immediately due to inadequate camouflage techniques. Outstanding field craft, Sergeant Volkov announced during the evening critique session. Miss Kozlov demonstrated textbook stalking techniques and achieved perfect target engagement. This is the standard expected of graduates from this program. But, Elena noticed that her success was creating new problems. Some of her fellow candidates were beginning to show signs of frustration and discouragement. The competitive nature of the program meant that her exceptional performance highlighted others' limitations. The situation reached a breaking point during the program's final major exercise, a comprehensive test that combined all the skills they had learned over the previous weeks. Candidates would be given a simulated combat mission requiring them to infiltrate enemy territory, establish a sniper position, and engage multiple targets under realistic battlefield conditions. Elena was paired with Mikhailov for the exercise, which would test not only individual skills but also the teamwork essential for sniper operations. As they prepared their equipment and studied their assigned mission, Elena sensed tension in her partner that hadn't been present during their successful survival exercise. "You know they're expecting us to fail, don't you?" Mikhailov said as they checked their gear one final time. Elena looked up from her rifle maintenance. "What do you mean?" "The instructors. Some of the other candidates. They've seen how well you've been performing, and they're waiting to see if you can handle the pressure of being the standout student. There's a difference between excelling at individual exercises and performing under the weight of everyone's expectations." Elena considered this as she finished cleaning her rifle. She had noticed the increased attention her performance had attracted, but she hadn't fully appreciated the psychological pressure that came with it. "Does that bother you?" she asked. Mikhailov met her eyes directly. "It bothers me that I might not be able to keep up with my partner when it matters most. You've set a very high standard, Elena. I don't want to be the one who brings down the best candidate in the program." Elena felt a surge of unexpected emotion at this admission. Throughout the program, she had been so focused on proving herself that she hadn't fully considered how her performance affected others around her. "You won't bring me down," she said firmly. "We're a team. We succeed together or we fail together. That's how partnerships work." As they prepared to begin the final exercise, Elena realized that this challenge would test more than just her technical skills. It would determine whether she could maintain her exceptional performance while supporting a partner who was struggling with self-doubt. The mockery of her early days had been replaced by a different kind of pressure, the weight of expectations and the responsibility that came with setting the standard for others to follow. The final exercise began before dawn on a fog-shrouded morning that reminded Elena of countless hunting expeditions with her grandfather. She and Mikhailov moved through the darkness toward their infiltration point, carrying equipment that represented months of intensive training. Their mission parameters were deceptively simple: penetrate a simulated enemy compound, eliminate designated targets, and extract without detection. But Elena understood that this exercise would determine not just who graduated from the program, but who among the graduates would be considered truly exceptional. The instructors had made it clear that performance during this final test would influence initial assignments and future career opportunities. "Radio check," Mikhailov whispered into his throat microphone as they approached their designated starting position. "Clear copy," Elena responded, testing their communications system one final time. They had trained extensively as a sniper team over the previous weeks, learning to coordinate their movements and share information with minimal verbal communication. Their target zone was a mock village constructed specifically for advanced training exercises. Intelligence briefings had identified 18 high-value targets positioned throughout the compound at varying distances and difficulty levels. Some targets would be stationary and relatively easy to engage, while others would move unpredictably or be positioned in locations requiring exceptional shooting skills. Elena studied the terrain through her night vision scope as they moved into position. The village was situated in a valley surrounded by hills that offered multiple potential sniper positions. However, each location came with distinct advantages and limitations. Closer positions offered better target identification but increased the risk of detection. More distant locations provided better concealment but demanded extraordinary shooting precision. "I'm seeing movement in the main building," Mikhailov reported quietly. "At least 4 targets, but they're staying behind cover most of the time." Elena adjusted her position to get a better view of the area Mikhailov had identified. Through her scope, she could see the subtle signs of human presence, brief shadows crossing windows, occasional glimpses of equipment, the barely perceptible patterns that indicated organized activity. "Confirmed," she whispered back. "But, we'll need to get closer for positive identification and clean shots." They began a careful advance toward the village, using the pre-dawn darkness to mask their movement. Elena's training in woodland stalking proved invaluable as they navigated through terrain that offered limited natural concealment. Every step was carefully planned and executed, with frequent pauses to assess their surroundings and ensure they hadn't been detected. As the sky began to lighten, Elena and Mikhailov reached a position approximately 600 meters from the village perimeter. They were concealed among a cluster of large rocks that provided excellent camouflage while offering clear fields of fire toward multiple target areas. "This is as close as we can get without serious risk of detection," Mikhailov assessed, studying the remaining terrain through his binoculars. Elena was already setting up her rifle, using techniques learned during months of training to create a stable shooting platform that would allow for precision fire at extended ranges. She attached her bipod, adjusted her scope settings for the current lighting conditions, and began range calculations for various points throughout the target area. "Range to the main building is 620 meters, she reported after careful measurement. Wind is variable but, generally from the northwest at approximately 8 kilometers per hour. I'm seeing heat shimmer beginning to develop, so we should engage distant targets before thermal effects become significant." Through her scope, Elena began identifying individual targets within the village. Each had been assigned a priority level based on the mission briefing, with some representing critical enemy leaders and others serving as secondary objectives. The exercise scoring would be based not just on accuracy, but on target selection and the tactical sequence of engagements. "I have positive identification on Target 1, Elena reported, focusing her crosshairs on a figure that had appeared in a second-story window of the main building. The target was holding what appeared to be communications equipment, marking him as a high-value objective. "Confirmed," Mikhailov replied, spotting the same target through his own optics. "Clean shot, no obstructions." Elena controlled her breathing, allowing her heart rate to settle into the slow, steady rhythm that provided optimal conditions for precision shooting. Her grandfather had taught her this technique decades ago, explaining that the moment between heartbeats offered the steadiest platform for accurate shots. Her first shot broke the morning silence with a sharp crack that echoed across the valley. Through her scope, Elena watched the target drop immediately, indicating a successful hit. She worked the bolt smoothly, chambering a fresh round while scanning for her next objective. "Target 1 eliminated," Mikhailov confirmed. "Multiple targets moving to concealment. We need to work fast before they adapt to our position." Elena had already identified her second target, a figure moving between buildings in what appeared to be a coordinated response to the first shot. This engagement required her to lead a moving target at extended range, accounting for both the target's speed and direction of travel. Her second shot found its mark just as the target reached the corner of a building. The figure dropped cleanly, indicating another successful engagement. "Outstanding shooting," Mikhailov whispered. "But, I'm seeing increased activity throughout the compound. They're definitely responding to our presence." Elena continued working through her target list with mechanical precision. Each shot required split-second calculations for range, wind, and target movement. Her hunting background served her well, providing instinctive skills for reading environmental conditions and predicting target behavior. Shot after shot found their intended targets. Elena's breathing remained controlled, her movements economical and precise. The months of training had transformed natural ability into professional expertise, allowing her to deliver lethal accuracy under combat stress. By the time she had engaged her 10th target, Elena realized that something extraordinary was happening. Every shot had been successful, with no misses or marginal hits. This level of performance exceeded even her own expectations. "Elena," Mikhailov said quietly, his voice carrying a note of awe. "You haven't missed a single shot. 10 targets, 10 kills." Elena checked her remaining ammunition and studied the target area for additional objectives. 8 targets remained on her list, including several that would require exceptional shooting skills due to distance, concealment, or movement patterns. "Still have work to do," she replied, focusing on a target that had appeared briefly on a rooftop approximately 800 meters away. The shot required her to compensate for significant bullet drop at extended range while accounting for a crosswind that had increased since the exercise began. Elena made her calculations carefully, adjusting her scope settings and pulled over to account for the challenging conditions. Her 11th shot traveled through the air for what seemed like an eternity before finding its mark. The distant target dropped immediately, confirming another successful engagement. "Unbelievable," Mikhailov breathed. "That was an 800-meter shot in crosswind conditions. I've never seen shooting like this." Elena was already transitioning to her next target, a figure that had appeared in a doorway for only seconds at a time in what appeared to be an attempt to assess the sniper threat. This target required patience and timing, waiting for the optimal moment when exposure would allow for a clean shot. When the opportunity came, Elena was ready. Her 12th shot caught the target during a brief appearance, achieving another clean elimination. The pattern continued through the remaining targets. Each shot demanded different skills and calculations, but Elena's performance remained flawless. She engaged moving targets, distant targets, and partially concealed targets with equal precision. As she prepared for her 18th and final shot, Elena realized that she had achieved something unprecedented in the program's history. 18 targets engaged, 18 successful eliminations. No misses, no marginal hits, no second shots required. The final target was positioned behind partial cover at the maximum effective range of her rifle. The shot required perfect calculation and execution, with no margin for error. Elena settled into her final firing position, controlling her breathing and heart rate one last time. The target appeared briefly in her crosshairs, offering a window of opportunity that would last only seconds. Her 18th shot completed what would later be called the most remarkable shooting demonstration in the program's 40-year history. 18 targets eliminated with 18 shots, under combat conditions that had challenged the skills of every sniper candidate who had ever attempted this exercise. "Exercise complete," Mikhailov announced over their radio, his voice carrying amazement and professional respect in equal measure. "All assigned targets eliminated. 0 ammunition remaining." The response from the observation post was immediate but subdued. The instructors had been monitoring every engagement through high-powered optics and radio communications. They had witnessed shooting that exceeded theoretical standards and challenged their own understanding of human capability under stress. "Team 7, maintain position and await extraction," came the radio response. "Outstanding performance." As Elena safed her rifle and began packing her equipment, she found herself thinking not about the technical achievement she had just accomplished, but about the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the mockery and skepticism of her first days in the program to this demonstration of exceptional capability, she had traveled a path that few would have thought possible. "You know what you just did, don't you?" Mikhailov asked as they prepared for extraction. 18 for 18 under combat conditions. That's not just passing the exercise. That's rewriting the standards. Elena considered his words as she secured her gear. It was just applying everything we've learned over the past months. No, Mikhailov said firmly. What you just did was demonstrate a level of skill that instructors dream about seeing. Most graduates are happy if they achieve 75% accuracy on this exercise. You achieved perfect accuracy while engaging some of the most challenging targets in the program. The extraction helicopter arrived within the hour, carrying them back to base where news of Elena's performance had already begun to spread. As they landed, Elena could see clusters of personnel gathered around the landing pad, including instructors from other programs who had come to see the candidate responsible for the unprecedented achievement. Captain Petrov was waiting as Elena stepped off the helicopter. His expression was carefully neutral, but Elena could see something in his eyes that she had never seen before, genuine astonishment. "Miss Kozlov," he said simply. "Report to my office immediately following equipment turn-in. We need to discuss your future assignment options." The debriefing session that followed would become legendary among sniper training personnel. Elena's performance was analyzed shot by shot, with instructors trying to understand how she had achieved results that exceeded their own capabilities. The technical aspects of her shooting were impressive enough, but what truly amazed the evaluation team was the mental composure she had demonstrated under extreme pressure. "In my 25 years of training snipers," Sergeant Volkov told the assembled staff, "I have never seen a demonstration of skill that approaches what we witnessed today. Miss Kozlov didn't just meet our standards. She established new ones." But, for Elena, the most meaningful moment came when she was approached by Mikhailov after the formal debriefing concluded. "I wanted to thank you," he said quietly. "Not just for the extraordinary shooting, but for how you handled our partnership. I was intimidated by your capabilities, and I was afraid I would let you down. But you never made me feel inadequate or unwelcome. You made me better by expecting excellence while supporting my efforts to achieve it." Elena felt a deep satisfaction at these words that exceeded any pride in her shooting achievement. "That's what partnerships are supposed to do," she replied. "We succeed together." The graduation ceremony took place 3 days later, with only 6 candidates successfully completing the program. Elena graduated at the top of her class with commendations for exceptional marksmanship, outstanding field craft, and exemplary teamwork. But, more importantly, she had earned the genuine respect of instructors and colleagues who had initially questioned her presence in the program. As she stood at attention during the ceremony, Elena thought about the long journey from the small village where her grandfather had first taught her to shoot. She had faced skepticism, overcome physical and mental challenges, and demonstrated capabilities that few had believed possible. The mockery of "just one woman" had been answered definitively. Not with words or arguments, but with 18 silent shots that spoke louder than any protest could have managed. In the months that followed, Elena's achievement would become a recruiting tool and training standard that inspired a new generation of military personnel. But, on that graduation day, she was simply a young woman who had proven that excellence recognizes no boundaries beyond those we impose on ourselves. The doubters had been silenced, not by confrontation, but by performance that transcended their limitations. Elena had answered the question of what one woman could accomplish with 18 precise demonstrations of just how much that could be. Her grandfather would have been proud.